So are you the kind of person who's sitting there going, I don't know which plant to get. Everybody's getting this plant, but I like this plant. This or that, which one should I go for? Stick around with me in this video, and after years of growing houseplants, I can tell you which ones I would say go for. Hi, my name is Memo, this is my channel, Houseplantygoodness, and essentially it's a place where I like to geek out about my big passion. You might be able to see some of it behind me, it's tropical houseplants. So today it's going to be a this or that video. As I said in the very beginning, I was thinking the other day, and it's one of those things that a lot of people that reach out to me, usually on my Instagram, and if you're not following me on my Instagram, it should have already been at the top, it's always at the bottom as well. Follow me along for there for some extra fun. But a lot of people will usually approach me and just go, I'm thinking about getting this plant. What do you think? What's your experiences been? And I've grown my fair share of houseplants. So I can talk from at least my experience. So this won't be an unbiased video by any stretch of the imagination. These are going to be my experiences, knowing what I know now after how many years of growing plants. Say I met myself somewhere and I said, look, I'm thinking about getting this. I would be sitting there going, no, don't get this, get that instead. So it's that kind of a video. So let's dive into the first one. The first one is going to be talking about Begonia types. So there are two distinct Begonia types that we tend to find a lot in the kind of houseplant world. One being Rhizomatous begonias and the other being Cane Begonias. And these two types of begonias grow in very different ways. So Rhizomatous begonias tend to be a bit more low-lying to the ground, whilst cane begonias tend to gain height. And I can show you an example of a cane begonia that I've got currently growing in my conservatory. So this is an example of a cane begonia. And you might be able to see, by the way, this is the Begonia brevirumosa subspecies exotica. Now, it might be looking a bit kind of weak and a bit spindly at the moment, and you can kind of see the canes, and I've also attached them to a lot of janky support sticks, because they tend to get a bit top heavy. At the moment, this is quite tall. Some people that have been here for a while, then I'll see if I can dig up a picture. I'll show you what the mother plant of this looked like. And I've always got propagates going, and this is one of the propagates. Basically, this came out of my propagation bin probably about a month ago, and it's already doing really, really well. By the way, a month ago, it was about this big. Some of the crispiness that you can see on the leaves is predominantly because it came out from a very high humidity environment, and it's moved into my conservatory, which is relatively high humidity, but it did okay, basically. And another example of a cane begonia, and I'll put it up here because at the moment I'm trying to prop my one back up, is the Begonia amphioxus. The obvious example would be the Begonia maculata whitei or the polka dot begonia, but you get the kind of vibe that I'm talking about. These begonias tend to be quite tall, and they have their leaves growing kind of like almost a bit like branches, if that makes sense. This kind of perfect example. Now, Rhizomatous begonias, I don't have that many of them. As I was saying, in this video, my this versus that would be, if you are just starting off with begonias, go with a cane begonia instead of a Rhizomatous begonia. The Rhizomatous begonias are still relatively easy, and I hesitate to say that, to care for, but they tend to be a bit more demanding. So a couple of examples, and I'll see if I can put some clips here basically, because most of my Rhizomatous ones are not movable at this particular moment in time. So I've got Chewbacca, which is my Begonia seismorii, and I've also got the Begonia, oh, am I blocking? It's not the ferox, the melanobulata. And those tend to be more low-lying, so the Rhizomatous begonias tend to be a bit more low-lying, and I also have found, after years of growing both types, because I do enjoy growing both types, and this is after years of growing them, the Rhizomatous tends to be a bit more fussy. towards a lot more fussy. The cane begonias are a lot more forgiving. Begonias are not the most forgiving houseplants, but if you're going this or that, I would definitely say go for a cane begonia. It will make your life a bit easier, and it's a good place to start when you're comfortable with caring for your cane begonias, then moving over to the rhizomatous begonias. Moving on to variegated plants, or variegation in general actually. And my this or that is going to be variegation that is mosaic variegation, and I'll give you an example here, and I can't move it because it's too big of a plant right now, but my Monstera albo, and versus blister variegation. Again, two big plants. So I will show you a leaf so you can understand what I mean by blister variegation. That is an example of blister variegation. This is Piper sylvaticum leaf, basically, and you might be able to see. And I'll explain why, basically. So with the mosaic variegation, it tends to be relatively unstable. So yes, it will teach you on kind of how to keep variegation and chop back your plant and make sure that you've always got those variegated leaves coming out because you bought it because of its variegated leaves, more than likely. Versus the blister variegation that tends to be intrinsic within the plant. So the plant will do this regardless. You don't basically have to baby it. Now, I'm already hearing the comments that are going to happen down below, but do let me know. There are other plants with more stable variegation. One that clearly comes to mind, which is the reason why a lot of people would want it, is the Monstera Thai constellation. That has got stable variegation. It's unpredictable, so you can't base it on the stem to see what the actual leaf is going to come out with, at least in my experience. I might be wrong, but at least in my experience, you can't always judge it the same way that you could with a Monstera albo, for instance, because you can usually see the candy striping on the stem to then realize quite how much variegation that leaf is going to have. But you don't have to baby it, basically. So if you just want a variegated plant that has got that kind of wow feel to it, and it's got the different coloration, and obviously the sylvaticum is an example of blister variegation, and blister variegation is something, as the name would suggest, I think I've done an entire video on variegation, if I'm not mistaken. I'll link it at the top there. But blister variegation, if you'd imagine the layers of the leaf, it's almost like an air bubble, and you get this a lot of times with more kind of silvery plants. So think of the Philodendron mamei. The other one is the Plamanii. A lot of these plants tend to have that silvery element on parts of those leaves, and that is blister variegation. It's basically an air bubble between the layers, and it's mainly to reflect the light, and it tends to be more on the silvery side of things. Not always, but it tends to be more on the silvery side of things. So, but those plants, you don't need to do anything to maintain that variegation. I'm thinking as well of the Plamanii. A lot of people might experience the Plamanii as it gets bigger, it loses some of that silveriness and it goes fully green. That can happen, but it's not the same that you would get with mosaic variegation. Another one that I can think of mosaic variegation, not just the Monstera albo, but the albo variegated syngonium, and also, if I am not mistaken, the Burley Marks variegata. They're all mosaic type of variegations, which means that essentially it's a genetic mutation on the plant, and you're basically constantly trying to keep that mutated form going. The plant will want to revert, and the reversion is it just wants to go back to all green leaves because it's its natural state of being, and it's healthier for the plant. It can photosynthesize a lot better. With blister variegation, because it is part of the morphology of the plant, you don't have to worry about that. So this or that, I would say avoid, at least if you're starting off, until you get a bit more comfortable, avoid something like mosaic variegation and go for something like a blister variegation or even stable variegations like the Monstera Thai constellation. Oh, and this might trigger a few people actually. Let me pick up an example and show you. So, has it been a while since you've seen me holding a Calathea? So my this or that for this one would be choosing a Calathea, you heard me right, choosing a Calathea over something like a Schismatoglottis. So I have attempted to grow the Schismatoglottis recently. That was a failed attempt, a bit of a spoiler there. That plant is no longer with me, mainly because I gave up on it rather than I could have had a very scraggly looking plant that was around. So, and I will heavily caveat this and go for some of the Calatheas that, if you're going to choose Calatheas over Schismatoglottis, and I'll tell you the reason why, go for a Calathea that tends to be a bit more robust. So for instance, and I know it's technically not a Calathea, they are technically Goproteas now, and also, I don't know if the Stramanthe Triostar has been reclassified in the Goproteas or if that is still a Stramanthe. But that one is one that I find tends to be a bit more forgiving. This one is as well. I think this is a white star. If not, I will correct myself at the top there. There are certain ones that are a bit more tolerant. What I'm saying is, don't go for the pinstripe Calathea. Pinstripe Calathea, let it be a bit further down in your journey. I know a lot of people start with that one, but it is one of the most challenging ones. It's beautiful, I get it, but start with some of these. And the reason why I'm showing you this is because the leaves are very, very similar to a lot of the Schismatoglottis, and I hopefully got a picture that I can add here. And I know there is a huge variety of Schismatoglottises that are coming out into the market at the moment, and Schismatoglottis, at least from what I can tell from like the Greek word that is its name essentially, it's basically saying like a split tongue. And I would imagine is because a lot of the times their foliage tends to be a bit like a tongue shape, and it tends to be symmetrical on either side. And this one's a very similar example. The one thing I will say is I thought prayer plants and Calatheas can be a bit diva-esque and a bit needy. Wow, in comparison to something like a Schismatoglottis, they are a walk in the park. Because that one has got very, very specific needs. So the Schismatoglottises, at least that one that I tried, and based on what I'm seeing from a lot of other people that have tried different varieties of it, it doesn't really change too much, is it wants an awful lot of water, but it wants a lot of like air in its soil, and it really doesn't like drying out and then it throws a wobbly, and you need to get just the right amount of light, otherwise it's always just looking a bit busted. So, yeah, this or that, Calathea over Schismatoglottis, at least in my experience, every day of the week. The next one's an interesting one because I don't talk about these types of plants too often on my channel. And it is Euphorbias versus cacti. And I know a lot of people will be like, but a lot of the Euphorbias look like cacti. Yes, but they are not part of the same family, if I'm not mistaken. So both of these plants, as long as you are not an overwaterer, can be relatively easy. However, if you are somebody who does enjoy watering your plants and you're not one of those people that wants to kind of set it and forget it to a certain point, I would say start off with something like a Euphorbia, because a lot of the Euphorbias, especially the Euphorbias that tend to look a bit more cactus-like, are plants that do appreciate a bit of watering even in the winter, basically. And I know a lot of people might actually just not water their Euphorbias throughout the whole of the winter the same way that they would do with their cactuses, because that is one of the benefits of a cactus, is that a lot of the times you can literally, at some point in autumn, stop watering and don't start watering again until the springtime when it's a bit more in active growth, which there are values to it there as well. But if you are a person that has even the smallest chance of wanting to water things over the winter and you kind of feel weird about not watering your plants, and generally, again, based on just my singular experience of growing both of these types of plants and my kind of care that I would give them, I would always go for a Euphorbia more than a cactus, basically. Both of them I enjoy growing, but the one thing I will say, because it's not going to be a segment about Euphorbias without me mentioning it, is be very careful if you ever cut the plant, specifically Euphorbias. I think it's called, is it milkweed or something? I cannot remember what it's called. But it has a very white, sticky sap that can be an irritant. So if you get it anywhere on your skin, make sure that you're clearing it off if you get that on your skin. Shall we move over to some Hoyas? Oh, I love the wax plants. So this one might come as no surprise to anybody who's grown both of these plants, basically. So for the more common Hoyas that you can find a bit more easily in the market, these days at least, it wasn't the case a few years back, but the Hindu rope, or the Hoya carnosa compacta, if I'm not mistaken. Beautiful plant, don't get me wrong. Exceptionally slow grower, basically, even for a Hoya. Versus the Hoya Australis lisa, which again, as I said, both of these plants weren't always as available, but they have been more in the recent years, basically. Now, what I'm saying is, don't get the Hoya compacta or the Hindu rope. Instead, get the Australis lisa. I know they are very different looking Hoyas. However, the Hoya compacta, carnosa compacta, or the Hindu rope, basically, all of those lovely little nooks and crannies, and if you've been growing Hoyas long enough, you know where I'm going with this. Mealybug, hotel, everywhere. And at least in my experience, there is no way of being able to get those mealybugs out without destroying half of the leaves, basically. And again, slow grower. You do not want to be removing leaves from this because it's taking you a very long time to grow those leaves. What's the Hoya Australis lisa? Again, it's a Hoya, so the mealybugs do love them quite a bit. It isn't anywhere near as bad as the Hindu rope, basically. So it is an easier one, and at least in my experience, super fast growing for a Hoya, and a lot more interest because those leaves have got all those kind of like almost variegated sections, it looks like, and the colors when they first emerge, beautiful. And again, based on my experiences, if you get it to a relatively decent size, it will bloom prolifically, and it's got a really nice smell as well. It's not one of the Hoyas that doesn't have any smell at all. At night time, you do get a really pleasant, at least in my opinion, floral scent from it. It might not be for everybody. I know some of the smells from Hoyas are not for everybody, and they tend to be a bit grandma-esque, but it's fine. I like it, and I would say this versus that, don't get the Hindu rope, get the Australis lisa. And let's move on to some epipremnums or pothos plants, basically. Now, the two that I'm going to be comparing is the Manjula pothos, or the Manjula epipremnum, versus the marble queen. Technically, I would also kind of lump in with the marble queen the epipremnum enjoy. And I'm hesitating a bit on that one because every time I have mentioned it on my channel, I get mixed feedbacks from people, generally speaking, on the enjoy. And I know that maybe it's a hybrid or a different form of the Manjula, but at least in my experience, Manjula pothos, do not get me wrong, it is beautiful. And I would almost go as far as say that it's the most beautiful of the three that we're talking about. But the Manjula pothos will go towards root rot at the drop of a hat. The marble queen, however, at least in my experience, is a lot more forgiving. I've even got it in places where it doesn't get an awful lot of light, so I might not get that much creamy variegation. It tends to be like a lighter green variegation, but I tend to find that it's a lot more forgiving and it's a lot more stable, basically, as well. Now, the enjoy is very similar, but, and I can understand how it might be linked to the Manjula pothos because it can go back towards root rot. Not as easily as the Manjula pothos, but relatively easily as well. So I've always joked on my channel that with my pothos enjoy, it's like a yearly tradition at this point. At the winter time, when it goes from kind of autumn, summer to autumn, and then into winter, I will almost invariably get some root rot and either have to restart all of my pothos enjoy again from the beginning, or kind of a few cuttings from it. So I've got so much pothos enjoy, but it grows like a weed, at least in my experience in here, like a weed over the summer. So actually it's fine, and it's multiplied to the nth degree. Manjula pothos is also much slower grower in comparison to the other two plants that I've said. Generally, even my marble queen tends to be faster than Manjula pothos. So at least in my experience, this versus that, don't go for a Manjula pothos. Go for an epipremnum enjoy or a marble queen. So this one might be a controversial one, and this is for the people that are okay paying a bit more for plants, because these plants, you know what I'm going to talk about. This one specifically, so this is the Philodendron Spiritus Sancti. seedling, so still very small for the people that are wondering where it is at the moment. And I will be comparing it versus the Esmeralda Spirit. So that's one of this newest leaves that is still hardening off, and it is beautiful. And I can show you one of his previous leaves there. Granted, I did get this plant as a more mature specimen than the Spiritus Sancti, and let me bring that up as well so you can kind of see. However, several things that I want to say. And obviously this one I'm growing on a moss pole, and to say that it's attached would be a bit of an understatement. It is a very, very attached, like an awful lot of roots basically. So this one's very happy. The Spiritus Sancti is getting there, but it's not quite there yet, basically. So let me bring both of these up and I'll see if I can kind of get them both in a shot. There. You can kind of see some of the other leaves. So obviously very different. One is a hybrid of this. So Spiritus Sancti is the true species. The Esmeralda Spirit, which I got from Equigenera, is, and I'm assuming they're the ones that named it, this is a hybrid between the Spiritus Sancti and the Esmeraldens. And you can see my large Esmeraldens behind me. So why the Esmeralda Spirit versus the Spiritus Sancti? Firstly, I think this has gone down significantly in price versus this one. I think this is still holding at least in the 3 digits from what I can tell. Most places, I know this is still probably going to go down. But the Esmeralda Spirit, if you can get your hands on one, is, at least in my experience, a much more vigorous grower. They're both relatively slow. This is so slow. But this one is a bit more of a vigorous grower, especially because I'm assuming it's got some of that Esmeraldens in it. So and I think this is going to be the first true summer that it's going to have fully in my space. I think watch out for this one. This is going to get quite impressive. But you can see with both of them, this one's still quite small, so you can't see, you can kind of get a vibe of what's going to happen, but look at those petioles. Both of these plants need a lot of space. So if you're going to be spending some money and you're still a bit unsure about this, I would say go for the Esmeralda Spirit if you can get one. I think you'll probably get much faster joy from this one than you will from this one. Obviously this one everybody wants to have, if for no other reason for bragging rights to say that we finally have an Esmeralda Spirit, a Spiritus Sancti, because everybody wanted a Spiritus Sancti for years and nobody could get them, mainly because they were difficult to get and also because they were so obscenely expensive. So wrapping up, it is, as I said in the beginning, these are my experiences. This is kind of like what I would have liked to have heard when I was first starting off with any of these plants, of kind of saying, somebody had stopped me to say, you know what, before you get that one, not saying don't get the one that you're after, but maybe try this one first and kind of come to terms with it, get to grips, get an understanding of it, and then kind of graduate to the other one. Rather than don't get it at all, it's more kind of see if you're comfortable with this, because it might be easier, it might be more stable, it might be a whole bunch of different things before you move on to one that might be a bit more challenging. Not to everybody and not to everybody's care, but in my experience at least. So I am very curious, from all of you out there, has anybody grown some of these plants that I'm comparing? Would you agree with me? Would you disagree with me? Why? Basically, let us know, because again, this is my experience. And I think this would be a valuable resource for the people kind of looking to get this or that, to kind of go, oh, okay, the vast majority is saying the same as Memo, or the vast majority is saying exactly the opposite as Memo. Let's go with that. So it'd be a nice little kind of repository of information down in the comments below so that people can see, you know what, do this instead of that. Or if you've got your own ones that you would like me to compare, as long as I've owned them and I can talk from experience, let me know in the comments down below and I can make a second video of this as well. But yeah, hopefully you've enjoyed. Hopefully I shall see you here soon, and I truly, truly hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.